Alright, I did a similar video to this about Boruto versus Naruto. Now I think it's about time I do it for my other favorite anime franchise, which is MHA. Now, I am curious because this one is a little bit contentious and I don't really know how to really scale this because there's a lot that we see about both of these characters, but a lot we don't see. And that is Shigaraki versus All For One. And I'm going to make it All For One in his rewinding form because All For One in his default form didn't really seem all that powerful. And his prime form we actually don't get to know a lot of information about, and we're not necessarily sure if his prime form was able to do all the stuff his rewinding form was capable of doing. But I'm going to try my best to break down each character in this video and see what they're both capable of and see who would have been the better body. I think the answer narrative-wise is pretty obvious, but I want to see if there's anything in the story that I might be missing or that we might be missing to really determine who is truly stronger. But anyway, before I get into it, make sure you guys like and subscribe for more videos like this. As I said, I'm trying to hit 500 by the end of the month, but who knows if I make it. Just subscribe if you like my content or if you find yourself coming back every week. More time in the year, more time to hit those numbers, but I appreciate every one of you. But let's get into it. Now when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at which could potentially have been a better body for All For One to inhabit. With Shigaraki, where obviously he's going to be the final antagonist of the story, so power-wise he's possibly the answer to this question. But looking at what the showings he's had so far, it's a little bit complex of an answer. As for AFO, when he was planning on creating the body, he didn't actually take into account that he could have used that rewind ability, plus that rewind ability had the drawback of he would eventually fade into nothing. But if he was to be able to control that or to stop that, or if he was to go toe-to-toe with Shigaraki during that time he was capable of rewinding, could Shigaraki have been capable of defeating him? Or would the rewind body would have been able to defeat him? It's a little hard to answer because again, there's so much that is missing between these two characters. But I'm going to try to break down AFO first so we can kind of get a better understanding of what he's capable of and what his rewind body seemed to be capable of. Now for AFO, we already know he's the main antagonist of the story, or he has been the main antagonist of the story for quite a while. And we're aware that he has a plethora of powers and abilities. And a lot of those abilities he also regained from having rewind. So abilities that he potentially gave away, he had again. And we saw that he has various abilities to cover various ranges of attacks. Some of his notable ones are the spear-like bones. He has his goo warping ability to teleport teammates or nomus as need be. He has air cannon that also works long range and close range. His rivet stab is one of his go-to abilities that he uses all the time. And his hypertrophy quirk, which he used against All Might to essentially be able to counter him in close range combat. But the issue with scaling All For One is that a lot of his quirks aren't named and a lot of his quirks aren't actually shown. And I'm not really sure how many he has because when we see him go up against Bakugo, it seems like he has hundreds of them, but he never uses more than like 10 in a battle. So all I can really do is go off his performances in previous other battles and see how his typical attacking style seems to be, as well as how well he fared while in his rewind form. Now when it comes to fights that he's had on screen, he seemingly doesn't have a lot of experience when it comes to close range combat fights. Now I know you're wondering what I'm talking about because AFO is shown to defeat various powerful users of quirks and various one-for-all users over the past. But if you look into what One For All was and how he defeated all the villains, or all the heroes, in the past, it kind of explains what I'm talking about. So when AFO has defeated all the heroes in the past at least, he usually just starts it with a giant attack that catches the heroes off guard. And he's shown that over and over. In the Kamino incident, before any of the heroes had time to respond, he just launched a giant air cannon wave that immediately took everyone out to begin with. And All Might basically also confirmed during the All Might versus AFO when All Might uses the Iron Might suit, he confirms that it's AFO's plan of attack usually is to strike someone with a long range attack, typically a sloppy one, and then come in to take their quirk. And when that seems to fail, his next fallback is that he will use mental manipulation in order to have them lower their guard, and then he'll come in for a strike. And potentially again, take their quirk and or just go in for the kill shot. We saw him first use that tactic versus All Might in Kamino, and then even during that fight, Gran Torino mentions that he used that tactic on All Might previously in their last battle. And we also saw him use it again against Endeavor in the final war arc. So it seems to be his go-to method of talking crap and then getting in the person's head and then going for a strike. But when it comes to ability-wise, it seems like he tries to keep the fight long range as long as possible before he if he tries to go in close range, he has to make sure that they're off guard in some way. Because what we've seen from his most notable close quarter combat fight, which was against All Might, he still lost to All Might, who was severely nerfed, and he had several quirks to try to compensate for his strength, but All Might beat him despite having most of his one for all powers gone at that point. But does this change when he gets rewinded? Now when he gets rewinded, he does have access to powers that he hasn't had or has probably given away over the course of time, and some of those abilities seem a little bit more fit for close range combat. Like when he was going up against Hawks, who's really good in close quarter combat, he used some sort of air twisting ability that essentially shredded Hawks and probably would have one-shotted him, but it turned out to be a vision created by one of the kids from Shuketsu High School. And he does seem to have a plethora of other abilities and other quirks that he's combining that he hasn't shown to combine in the past, or at least when we've seen him in his masked form. Like he's able to combine some beaming abilities that he's never shown to have before, as well as it seems like he grows some sort of weird wings out of his back. And let's not forget the most important aspect of his rewinding is his ability to heal. His ability to heal has seemingly surpassed everything we've seen in the past when it comes to healing capabilities. Now, the only one I could think that could rival him is the No-Moves and Shigaraki, but they seem to have a shortcoming when it comes to their healing capabilities because it seems as if their body takes a lot of damage rapidly, they could die. And what I mean by this, in the initial fight with Deku versus Shigaraki versus, I guess, the rest of the hero forces, when Endeavor hits him with that prominence burn, All For One mentions to Shigaraki that that attack could have potentially killed him in his body at that 70% form. And if that prominence burn didn't kill him, the fall from that height could have potentially destroyed his body. Not only that, but when he tried to free his original body from Tartarus, if they didn't do their attack from both simultaneous ends, the water pressure alone would have been enough to kill that body of Shigaraki's. Granted, it was only at 70%, but that's neither here nor there. I'll talk about Shigaraki later. But when it comes to All For One, it's seeming that he takes a lot more damage in that rewinding body, and he's still able to get up. Even when he gets hit with essentially attack from all the biggest hitters, which I'm also going to touch on in a second, in the MHA universe, he is left in worse shape than when Shigaraki got hit by a damn nuke, and he's still able to rewind and take them all out. And when it comes to the people who were attacking him, we had Gigantomachia, we had Tokoyami, who had a full-powered Ragnarok Dark Shadow, and we had Mount Lady, who is pretty strong, but, you know, she's there. And Inasa, who's also a really powerful quirk user. But a lot of them had a lot of quirks varying from long range to close range. But his long range attacks was so powerful that it not only one-shotted Gigantomachia, a feat that we have never seen before, because we've never even seen someone in the likes of All Might go up against Gigantomachia, so we're not really sure how powerful he could be, but we've definitely not seen him take any kind of damage in the past. And a crazy overpowered Dark Shadow. And Dark Shadow is definitely a close range attacker. But yeah, the fact that he was able to take out, like 7 or 8 MHA students, or as well as some of the biggest hitters in the series, was quite impressive of a showing. Now, I know that one of the big takeaways is that he lost to Bakugo, who was also a dying kid, but I'm not going to hold that against him because he was really desperate at that moment. He was running really low on time, and he was about to essentially turn into a fetus in a few minutes. So he didn't have time to use his usual tactics, which was try to manipulate Bakugo. He didn't seem to be thinking logically in his attacks. He just seemed to be throwing whatever he could just to get to Shigaraki on time, and it eventually worked against him. Now, to not go on rambling, let's just give All For One's abilities and stuff scores. So I want to say his long range ability from a scale of 1 to 5 is a solid 5. I would even give it a 6. His battle tactics, I want to give it a 3. He's really good at long range attacks. He's really good at mental manipulation, but close range still seems to be his weakness. Actually, scratch this, after going and rewatching a lot of Shigaraki's biggest fights and All For One's biggest fights, I realized that most of Shigaraki's biggest wins actually came from when he was in the consciousness fusion with All For One, and he still does have his short range weakness, but it's not as bad as I thought. So I'm actually going to bump him up to a 4.5, or let's just say 4. And his regeneration on a scale of 1 to 5, it's probably like a 7, because he's been able to regenerate from almost any attack to almost any level, and at one point he didn't even have a damn pelvis, and he was still able to regenerate. But there is one thing that Shigaraki has that might be able to counter that regeneration ability. But when it comes to the two regenerating, I think that his is without a doubt more powerful than Shigaraki's. But the thing that gives it a bit of a challenge to kind of rank him and his abilities is exactly what quirks he might have versus what quirks Shigaraki might have. Because of his rewind, again, he got access to some quirks that he never had before, but he also seems to have more quirks than Shigaraki because something I'm going to mention later down the line. But overall, it's not that they have one-for-one quirks, but they do have a lot of overlapping quirks that are similar. And I know there's a whole theory that he could have potentially gave Shigaraki Decay. Seeing that he was rewinding, maybe he could have had access to Decay if he ever owned it, but we never saw him use it, so I'm not going to say that's a potential power that he had. But seemingly, only thing that could kill him while he's in this state is the time limit, which if that wasn't a factor, which I said at the beginning, if he could rewind consistently back to his late teen to early 20 self, which seemed to be his prime. But before we factor that in, let's actually talk about Shigaraki. Now again, Shigaraki is a little bit more complex of a topic because there's a lot of things going on with his enhanced body and a lot of things going on with his quirk and a lot of things going on with what seemingly him reaching the point of singularity where he forms one with his quirk. Now when it comes to combat, I want to say Shigaraki is way more inept with close range combat than All For One could be because of the nature of his original quirk, which was Decay. He needed to be able to get in close and be able to touch people. And yes, he does get an upgrade later down the line where he could use Decay without actually physically touching the person, but he had to learn how to get close range for quite a while. And seemingly even while he's being jumped and has the numbers against him, he could still close that distance to hit someone with Decay. And we saw that in his fight against Redestro, where he was persistently trying to get in close to hit Redestro, and he was also trained fighting Gigantomachia for quite a while, so he got pretty good at close range combat. And using ability like Decay would be pretty useful, especially for if you're trying to talk about who has a better body, when it comes to having someone who not only knows close range combat, but also has a power that is very useful close range, and also very useful long range. But let's talk about some of Shigaraki's other abilities, and then we can come to a consensus on how we rate him at the end. Now we're also aware that Shigaraki has All For One's ability, but there's a little bit of a caveat to it, because it doesn't seem like Shigaraki has that same mastery over the ability to use the quirks that AFO has. Now Shigaraki has used a handful of quirks, but it seems like he's limited to maybe about 4 or 5. He's constantly just using Air Cannon, he's using the Rivet Stab, as well as Decay. And sometimes he uses Radio Waves, which I believe was destroyed, so he doesn't really use that anymore. And it seems like he has some sort of flying ability, which I'm a little bit confused about because he didn't seem to be able to fly in the past, but he seems to be flying in his fight against Deku, but it could just be him using his enhanced body. Which brings me to the main point is his enhanced body seems to be his biggest factor in most of his win conditions. Because not only is it really sturdy, but his regeneration factor is also really important. Now when he's at 70%, his regeneration factor is not nearly as good, as you see his body almost falls apart if he takes too much damage consistently. But once it is at full capacity, it doesn't seem like it has any drawbacks. Like we saw with the fight against Endeavor versus the Nomu, which I'm pretty sure Shigaraki has the same ability, that as long as the head survives, they can withstand anything. But it's a little confusing because some of the statements that I've mentioned earlier that All For One mentions about that it could not necessarily be able to take everything. Like there are various things that could have killed him at any point in the story. And even while he's fighting Deku, apparently Deku still has the ability to take Shigaraki out, and Shigaraki even admits it as much, that Deku could take him out at any moment. It's just that Deku doesn't really choose to kill. So yeah, it's seemingly powerful in the instances that we've seen him use it. It has been pretty powerful, but it seems like it's limited in its abilities as opposed to AFO's regeneration. Now this is a bit confusing because the statements don't always match up with the action, so that's why I'm kind of a little torn on how powerful his regeneration can be. Because yeah, it's been stated that it can only withstand certain levels of attacks and certain levels of damage, but seeing as the attacks he's been hit by and the level of power, it's definitely way more powerful than I think Ocean Pressure could be, and way more powerful than I think falling from a really high distance could be. But I don't know, Deku seems like he can basically smash continents, so it's kind of hard to say that, yeah, he's not getting hit with the same level of pressure. As well as his awakening, where it seemed like he was able to mass regenerate and grow arms, and that seemed like it would have been a really important thing to have, and it would have been a really big factor if he was going up against Deku, All For One especially, because if he was able to use Decay through that mass arm thing that he was able to do before, then he could have potentially been able to take anyone out from any distance. But after he was essentially birthed out of himself, like he came out of a cocoon out of himself, he has not seemed to show that ability again, and some of the abilities he's shown in the past he doesn't seem to still have. Because, as I said, he had a ability to fly, or he had a wing ability, but he's able to fly now without showing both the wing ability as well as his original flying ability. And Star and Stripe even managed to kill and destroy a couple of his quirks before her quirk was allegedly defeated in his body. But if we're going off of statements alone, let's just say that Shigaraki is prime All Might levels of power, and his regeneration is not nearly as powerful as All For One's regeneration, but his body sturdiness is a lot higher. So if I was to rate him on abilities, I would give his regeneration a 4, his long range abilities, at least when it comes to fighting AFO, a 3, and battle tactics, I want to also give him a 5. And also a lot of this is actually based off of when he was mixed with All For One, because when he was mixed with All For One, we saw that he was really good at utilizing a lot of his close range abilities and fighting styles, but noticeably All For One tries to still remain a bit long range when fighting, even in Shigaraki's body. But there's also a lot of factors that go into that. Usually he's being nerfed in some way, or it was when Shigaraki's body was falling apart. So still a little hard to rate his tactics, but I'm still going to go with a 5. And again, these are out of 5. Now, the difficulty of it is it's kind of hard to tell, A, what abilities he still has left after Star and Stripe defeated him. It seemed like he lost quite a bit of quirks, but the story has only seldomly addressed that, because some of the quirks that were supposed to be destroyed, he seemingly still has. So I don't necessarily know what abilities he currently has in that form. Next thing, we're not really sure if he actually knows how to even use the abilities of All For One, because he sometimes uses them. He mostly just uses the enhanced body, and he uses decay. And in a fight between the two, knowing how to use all the quirks will definitely come in handy. And when it comes to close range abilities, yeah, decay is ridiculously powerful. Like, decay is insanely powerful. But we've seen time and time again that multiple people have figured out different tactics on how to counter decay. And in several instances, they have not actually been hit by it. And when someone is aware of what decay is capable of, they usually have countermeasures to deal with it right after. Now, but even with everything I've listed with Shigaraki, and I know I've seemed a little harsh on Shigaraki, it is still kind of difficult to kind of rate them between the two, because reasonably, there's no real answer to who's better. And though the story has kind of leaned more towards Shigaraki being better, it's only because All For One is constantly mentioning that he needs to get his body to Shigaraki, because his current body won't last that long. And it's not really sure if his current body is actually better. It's just that it's temporary. That's the only reason why he wants to get it to Shigaraki. So for an answer, I'm just going to give multiple situations, and I'm going to say who I think would win or who do I think is better for a particular situation. Now, when it comes to who has the better body, I'm going to give it to Shigaraki. Though, again, All For One has that crazy regeneration ability, and I think that it would be much more useful to him, especially since it doesn't really seem like anyone could kill him if need be. But that ability for him to both fight close range, as well as his experience with using all the quirks of All For One, especially having the strength of All Might mixed with decay, I think that he would actually better utilize the abilities way more than Shigaraki could. And even in the War arc, we've seen that when he did take advantage of the body, that he did way better in the fight while the body was basically falling apart than Shigaraki did when it was at full strength. And seeing that he unlocked a lot of his abilities once he was rewinded, I think if he did manage to get his quirk to Shigaraki and fuse their bodies together, they would have been nigh unbeatable. Now, the question is if they went up against each other in a head-to-head fight. Like, so in a scenario, let's say All Might didn't get his Iron Might suit in time, and AFO just literally flew right past him and went straight to fighting Shigaraki. Or even managed to kill him on the way there, who knows. But in that fight, they arrived with him and Deku both there, and AFO and Shigaraki versus Deku wouldn't have been a fight. And Bakugo would have taken at least 20 minutes to wake up, and AFO would have reached there long before Bakugo would have ever woken up. So yeah, he would have definitely defeated Deku. Now, for the fight against him versus Shigaraki, I'm weirdly gonna give this to All For One, just simply because he is well aware of Shigaraki's abilities, and he, again, can better utilize the quirks way better than Shigaraki can. And seeing that Shigaraki relies heavily on decay, all he would have needed to do was just remain in the air and hit him with a lot of big attacks. Attacks that seemingly were powerful enough to injure Gigantomachia, who, let's just say, maybe about the same sturdiness as Shigaraki's body is. And we see how quickly and easily that tore through Gigantomachia. And I think that he would have been able to A, either kill him, or B, gotten able to touch him to take his quirk and put it into his body, or to take his quirk and put it and overcome Shigaraki in the first place. Now, the only issue with this would have been if Shigaraki was able to physically touch him, he could have decayed him and defeated him immediately. But as we've seen in multiple fights, and as I said previously, for All For One to have raised Shigaraki, and he knows full and well capabilities of all the quirks in his body, as well as the ability of decay, he would have made sure to not get touched. He would have made it his top priority to not get touched and to just continuously spam him with attacks. Now Shigaraki is significantly faster than him at this point, and maybe he could have closed that distance, but with his regeneration, every other factor to boot, I don't necessarily think Shigaraki could have won this. And plus, if Shigaraki touches a non-vital area, what's stopping All For One from just cutting off that part and just tossing it back at Shigaraki, or just straight up cutting off that body part and regenerating it anyway? But this is only because we've not seen a full power Shigaraki. Every time we've seen full power Shigaraki, he again has only used the K or has only been using his regeneration or a few other quirks. He hasn't actually shown him using the level of quirks that All For One used. So if we're going on, I guess, who's better, it's, I guess, clearly All For One, because he's way more experienced when it comes to fighting. He's way more experienced when it comes to using his own quirk, and the abilities of decay is very powerful. But Shigaraki has like barely won all his battles as is, and I'm pretty sure that if All For One was to be at full control of his body, he would have done much better in a lot of the fights that he was in. And I know a lot of people might use that, well, Shigaraki is super powerful without quirks, but seemingly I guess the story's kind of tossed that part out the window, because since his rebirth, it seems that that weird hand thing he has going on is no longer a factor, because when we see him fighting Deku, he's not using his hands like indefinitely. Doesn't mean he doesn't have that ability, but it just seems like that's not an issue anymore, and that weird sturdy body thing he made seems to also not be a factor anymore. And plus, it seemed like it couldn't even keep up with like 120% Deku anyway, so. And also Shigaraki should have a bunch of hypertrophy quirks, but even his battle with Deku, he doesn't seem to be using them, because I think that would actually make their power level much closer to even. If he's close to perfect All Might levels of strength, he should be way more powerful than Deku, because you saw AFO was able to match All For One's level of strength with his base body with just quirks. So Shigaraki should be way more powerful than that. But I don't know, maybe if he still had the ability to access like that, if he still does, he could potentially still beat All For One, but for right now, that remains inconclusive. That just seemed like it was a weird thing going on while he was trying to fight All For One's body off from controlling his own body. But yeah, I'm still going to give this to All For One. I know this might be contentious, and I know people in the comments are already getting ready to flame me, but I'm going to stick with this decision at least for now. Because All For One's story has come to an end, so we kind of know what he's capable of, but Shigaraki's story is still being written, so it's very hard to gauge him, especially when they've tried to actively not show the full capability of his powers. Every opportunity they can, he's either having them erased, or he's being nerfed, or he's mentally in duress, so it's kind of hard to say how powerful he truly is. But just going off of the showings that he's had so far, he's not really all that, in my opinion. Anyway, you guys can feel free to debate me down in the comments. I'll probably try to answer as many questions as I can. I already know this is probably going to be even more contentious than my Boruto versus Naruto video, but I'm going to have to just stand on this one and hope for the best. But anyway, if you guys made it to the end, thanks again for watching. Be sure to drop a subscribe if you liked the video. Also, be sure to go follow me on Twitter with the same name, No Tail Ninja. And I appreciate every single last one of you guys. I'm truly appreciative. Even if I don't hit 500 by the end of the month, I'm truly appreciative to everyone that's come back to my channel and everyone that watches every week. And I hope you guys stick around, and I hope you continue to watch me to grow. But that's all I have to say for now. Stay safe, my ninjas, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.